Hello everyone, just to let you all know, if you want to listen to this full episode of the official Celtic FC podcast, you can get it wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the official Celtic FC podcast.
In terms of Aberdeen, we've just touched on, they got to the League Cup final last weekend, defeating Hibs in extra time. Bojan Miovski scoring to win that game 1-0. So far this season, a little bit indifferent, the form potentially, Willie, would you say? They've had 3 wins, 3 draws, 4 defeats. Maybe the factor of Europe coming into that one, would you say?
Yeah, and I think a lot to do with the signing about 8 or 9 players at the start of the season as well. So Aberdeen's obviously dipped into that kind of Eastern European market where they've got these players in. It's took him a bit of time to settle. I just don't know if Barry knows his right formation now. And he's 3 at the back seems to be his kind of way forward with that. No, they're kind of done well to the end of the season when Barry came in. Sticky start to the season, but they've picked up a little bit, so it will be a tough game, I think.
Because funny, I think every Celtic fan really likes Barry Robson just from his time here and how committed he was. And it was interesting before that Cup semi-final, and I don't know whether just some of the criticism he's had riled him a bit, because he was kind of saying, we've had a really bad season because we know we're 6th in the league now, we're climbing the table, we've got European group stage football, we're 90 minutes away from a cup final. So I think he was trying to say to people, look, just take a wee step back, because actually it's early in the season still, to your point, they're still building a team.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that happened last year when he came in as well. They were down about 2nd, 3rd bottom, and all of a sudden they got a few results and they kind of leapfrogged right up the table, up to 3rd. And again, that's where Aberdeen should be looking to finish this season realistically, to be honest.
Yeah, and they have shown so far this season with a lot of the performances, again, as we're saying, we're recording this before the game against PAOK, so we don't know what's going to happen. But particularly in Europe, I mean, the game against Frankfurt away from home, they equalised that very much in it. It was just a late goal to lose that 1-2-1. The PAOK game at home last time around, was it 2-0 up? And then to lose it so dramatically.
But they were winning 2-1 in one of the most obvious penalties you're ever going to see.
Exactly, yeah.
And for some reason, the referee and the VAR official didn't see it, which would have put Aberdeen 3-1 up, and they'd have won the game. It was extraordinary.
I know, it was bizarre. I thought we were maybe going to have a VAR free chat in this podcast, but can't do a podcast without it. I know. But yeah, the point is that they have shown that they're a very capable side, and going into the game on Sunday, we know that they're going to have a lot of threats, Willie. Yeah,
they've got a lot of pace up front. If Duke plays, or if he just plays the one up front, so Celtic will have to be aware of that, But as you say, Celtic are so strong at home, and it's like they talk about it all the time. If you keep Celtic to 10 minutes, 20 minutes, get the crowd kind of quiet, but very hard to do. It's all right saying it in paper and writing it in paper, but it's very hard when you're out there and you're chasing shadows.
Because you mentioned, right at the start of the podcast, obviously you played under Alex Ferguson, who probably was, one of the best managers in terms of bringing in an Aberdeen side down to Glasgow and being able to compete and do well at places like Celtic Park.
Well, definitely. As you grew up as a kid, it was drummed into you. So when you came down to Parkhead or Ibrox, you were expected to win, not just draw. You were expected to win. So if you got defeat or whatever, you knew that you were going to be in the Sunday running up and down Aberdeen Beach because Celtic or Rangers just beat you. That was the kind of mentality he installed in you.
Yeah, that kind of moves us on nicely, just to looking back on some good memories of this fixture in particular. But I suppose we'll start off because, as you mentioned there, about playing for Aberdeen and coming down here to Celtic Park, and in that time in the 80s, it was a bit of a rivalry between the clubs because Aberdeen were winning titles, Celtic were winning titles as well. So does anything come to mind from your point of view when you think back to this fixture and the games that you played in?
I think it was just as I touched on earlier, the atmosphere here. The crowds were unbelievable. And it just kind of picked you up and gave you an extra kind of push forward. But as I say, like Aberdeen at that time, like Sir Mark McGee, Eric Black up front, John Hewitt with a great striking. It was about 4 or 5. So as a kid, I came in at 17, I think, when I made my debut. So I had to get past about 5 of these guys to even get a game, So, but the games were roller coaster, They were tight games all the time. And I think back then it was at 83 or 84 season. I think Dundee United actually won the league by something like 56. Celtic were 55. Aberdeen were 55. You know, it was unbelievable that they won it by 1 point. You know, that's how close it was. And that's when obviously Aberdeen and Dundee United were at the top of the form as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Paul, we were talking it was last week we had Danny Craney on the podcast, and we were talking about how Celtic and Aberdeen was almost the fixture back then.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was my memories of, as I say, when I started going to the games myself in the early 80s. The big game for Celtic in terms of winning the league or not winning the league was Celtic Aberdeen, and those were the Derby game was a different thing. It was obviously special in its own way, but in terms of the best two teams in Scotland, it was Celtic and Aberdeen, and it was that era of, you know, you mentioned some of the forward players, Willie, but if you went through that whole Aberdeen team, there was, you know, really top players, so they were, you know, physically a really tough team as well as being a good football team. And then you know, obviously Alex Ferguson knew that you had to come down and win in Glasgow, and whether it was here or Ibrox or at Hampden, then, you know, that's what Aberdeen did. But those were the games, I just remember they were always the best games, the most exciting and the most competitive.
Yeah, no, and the football was great to watch as well, you know, and it was, I suppose it was back in the day when you could tackle somebody around the neck and the referee's like that, play on you go. You know, so it didn't, the game never stopped for any amount of time.
Yeah. And I suppose if you look at the two teams, I mean, there are a lot of top players. We had a lot of top players at the time, most of which were all Scottish players. It was probably the height as well of Scotland consistently producing some really, really good players.
Yeah, back then there wasn't many the foreign guys at clubs back then, you know, maybe one or two at different clubs here and there, but you're right, it was mostly the kind of the Scottish, and obviously when Souness came in there was a lot of the English guys came up as well, you know, but no, it was the majority, it was all Scottish players. Yeah,
one thing I wanted to ask, because Paul, you'd mentioned before when you used to come to the games, and I can't remember what player it is that you said that someone used to warm up on the side of the pitch and you thought they were trying to like antagonise the jungle.
I know who he's going to say before he even says it. Doug Rugby.
Yeah. Was that the plan?
Honestly, we came out for the warm up, right? And I think it was, must have been like August or whatever. It was one of the first games of the season, and it was about 90 degrees. So Sir Alec had said, everybody warm up under the main stand because that's where the shadow is. Don't go across to the other side where the sun is. Big Doogie, right across to the jungle, sidestepping up and down, just winding everybody up, you know. It was unbelievable. This is before the game even started, you know.
Yeah, because I remember being in the jungle and the whole place is going mental, but at the same time, you knew what he was doing, and it was. I mean, you laugh about it now, but I mean, but that was all part of it. It was to show, I think, as well, that, you know, he wasn't intimidated for.
One of that same games, I'll never forget, and the guys talk about it all the time. It's like the ball goes into the jungle, and the usual back then, there was only one ball. It wasn't balls coming in for the ball boys, you know, so you're waiting ages for it to come back. So Big Doogie's on that side of the jungle, and he's waiting for the ball to come back, but he's pointing to all the players. They're like, I'm going to throw it there, whatever. So the ball comes back out, and he picks it up, and the steam's coming off the ball. So he's juggling it and throwing it away. You know, like, just you couldn't make that up.
Change days, isn't it? Moving on. But when you used to come down for those games under Sir Alex Ferguson, what was he like as a manager coming to Celtic Park? Because as you mentioned, they would say, you know, we're coming down to Celtic, we need to win these games. That's the expectation as an Aberdeen player then. But what would he do anything differently in those games coming down to Celtic Park?
Not so much different. I think just kind of install it into you. Like we'd have a meeting on the Friday, we'd have about 2 meetings on the Saturday before the game, you know, and everything was just drummed into you. You're coming here to win the game. Don't let the fans get on top of you. Don't get like the atmosphere get on top of you. Play your game, play the football sort of thing. But he never really changed it. He just kind of wound you up a bit more than you would if you were going to maybe a Motherwell or a St Johnstone or whatever, you know.
How would he wind you up?
Basically threaten you. You know, but no, threaten you in a good way, and then it would threaten you in a bad way if you got beat.
Were you ever on the end of his famous hairdryer treatment?
Yeah, many a time. Yeah, many a time. Many a time I've seen that dressing room, and you had guys up against the wall, and anything that was nearby, you were like getting something that was bouncing off the wall, whether it be like an old haze lemonade bottle or a teacup or whatever it may be. You know, it's so you had to be kind of sharp in your reactions.
But he must have had like the other side to him as well. He couldn't have just been all rage, because everybody that played for him absolutely loved playing under him, and I can't imagine if someone's just screaming at you all the time. I mean, I don't know if it's just changed days now, but
no, away from the game, like obviously the game, and he was so motivated to win the games, you know. But away from that, during the week, it was different class. Cell and Archie Knox, Teddy Scott at the time as well. The training was good. There was always a bit of joking, laughter, whatever. It wasn't all kind of serious, you know. But he was so kind of focused on that winning mentality and then drumming it into you.
mm-hmm.
So I always remember one of my favourite stories reading it, and I hadn't realised till quite recently, was when Aberdeen went to Gothenburg for the 83 Cup Winners' Cup final. Alec Ferguson brought Jock Stein, invited Jock Stein as part of the official party, and had him there, and because Jock Stein was his mentor, and they were very, very close. And I think he just obviously having that presence, but also somebody who had experienced winning a European trophy, to be there in and out, these players, and you know, it's probably wee things like that, details as well.
Yeah, I think you got him to come in and speak to the players, you know, just on the kind of the back of the Lisbon lines, etc. You know, so it was a good kind of PR work back then, you know, that nobody would have thought about.
Yeah. I didn't know that at all. It's really, really interesting.
I think it was because they had in the last couple of years, it was a documentary just about Aberdeen winning the Cup Winners' Cup, and I think that was one of the things that was mentioned on it. And it was really interesting that just that psychology of knowing that maybe just at the right moment, the right person coming in, and because he obviously knew the team was good enough to win, but just those wee things can push them on.
Yeah. Paul, do any kind of Aberdeen games come to mind for you? We've been talking about that period in the 1980s. Is that kind of the most significant ones to you? Is there any games at all that stand out that really hark back to your memories?
There was actually a couple up at Pittodrie in the centenary season. So I think when we played, I'm not sure if we won and drew down here, but we won both games up at Pittodrie 1-0. I think Frank McAvenny scored in one of them, and then Andy Walker scored in the other one, and that was obviously a crucial season for us. And again, you know, Aberdeen was still a really strong side, so to go up there twice and get the points was really important for us.
What was that Celtic team like to come up against, Willie, in the 80s period? Because I suppose, like, for people like myself, you grow up in the stories as a Celtic fan about the teams in the 60s, 70s, 80s. You get to see some highlights, but without actually really sitting down and watching a game and knowing how did they play, what was the football like, what was the standard like. So what was it like coming up against those teams? Yeah,
they were a great footballing team. You know, they were great, but they had players in that team like a big Roy Aitken, you know, and like organising at the back. They had a strong forward line as well, you know. Back then, Andy, McAvenny, Charlie had left by then, so I think it was Big Rambo, Big Alan McInally was there at the time as well, you know. So they were strong up front, you know. They were always kind of a goal threat, but played good football, you know. They always played good football. Like you see teams playing up for the back nowadays, but Celtic not to that extent, but they were a good footballing team back then. Yeah.
Do you have any battles in particular with any Celtic players?
I remember. It's funny. I made my debut for Aberdeen on a Wednesday night. It was against Watershire in the semi-final of the Cup Winners' Cup, and I just turned 17. So on the Saturday we were playing Celtic at Pittodrie, and I was on the bench, and I came on for about the last 20-25 minutes. So that was my first kind of Premier League game at that time. So that was me kind of thrown in at that age. But I'll never forget, I came on, and I was against Roy Aitken, and Roy was brilliant, mind games, you know. So I'm standing, and obviously the ball's down the other end, and Roy's talking away to me, you know. He says, see when that ball comes up here, I'm going to smash you. Right, so all of a sudden I've got to my head, when this ball comes up, I'm going to get one for the behind, you know. And then the ball came up, so it stuck. And then he said, come on then, can you take me on? And no, that way your mind's good. But that was all the learning curve, you know. Yeah. That was you kind of growing up from being like an apprentice into a man's game, you know. And he wound me up and all that. So the next, you take that to the next game. But I'll never forget Roy kind of just mind games with it, you know, just playing.
Did you ever mention it to him again?
I did. I seen him years and years after that, and I think it was actually when he's the manager when he was at Aberdeen, actually, and I was at one of the games and we're talking about it and having a laugh about it, you know. But that was Roy, you know, he just to kind of get the edge whatever way he could.